Protocol observed. Thank you very much for your presence. I'm here as the General Secretary, United Nations. Okay. I'm here at the African Union Summit with a very clear message of solidarity. Solidarity with the African Union and solidarity with the African continent and the African people in this trying period in which the many crises we are witnessing in the world are having a very dramatic impact in Africa. And so, my message to African leaders today was simple. The United Nations stands together with the people of Africa at this moment that is a moment of risk, but that is also a moment of enormous promise and potential. From the African Union's ambitious development roadmap, Agenda 2063, to the transformational potential of the African continent free trade to create new, sustainable sources of jobs and prosperity, to the launch of the Decade of Women's Financial and Economic Inclusion, to the energy, ideas and innovation of Africa's growing population of young people, to the Africa's Silence the Guns initiative to deliver peace and stability. The 21st century could be, it must be, Africa's century. We must draw on the continent's natural, human, cultural and entrepreneurial richness to make this a reality. But first, we must overcome a series of massive tests. A dysfunctional and unfair global financial system that denies many African countries the debit relief and the concession of finance they need. Systems and structures from health and education to social job creation and gender equality are starved of investment for lack of support. A cost of living with rising food and energy costs made worse by the consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and climate chaos that is causing floods and deadly droughts. On top of that, we have complex peace and security threats, including rampant terrorism that are jeopardizing the people's lives and futures across the continent. And facing all these challenges, Africa deserves much more massive international solidarity. When we saw a recovery from the COVID, many developed countries in the world were able to print money. To a certain extent, also contributed to the global inflation we have today. African countries could not print money because their currencies could then be in complete jeopardy. And so, Africa has had much less resources to come out of COVID crisis than developed countries. And with the lack of effective financial support, the African continent is facing a very difficult situation. And that is why I call for action for Africa. And starting by Africa's economy, developing countries are handed over a raw deal. I have called for a new Bretton Woods moment to give developing countries a greater voice in global institutions and create a new debit architecture that provides relief when countries need it the most. I have also called for multilateral development banks to transform their business models, accept new risks and massively leverage their funds to attract more private capital to developing countries and multiply resources to invest in the sustainable development goals. I have also called for the development world to stand with emerging economies as they make tough transitions that will benefit the world through an ambitiously funded global SDG stimulus package that I proposed to the G20. And so often, Long-standing development issues can combine with climate chaos, economic shocks, and violent conflicts, and spin into a world of humanitarian disaster. Around the world today, 313 million people of humanitarian aid, an increase of more than 25% since last year. And so today, here in Addis, I'm announcing the largest ever allocation from our United Nations Central Response Fund, $250 million, to combat famine and to address underfunded emergencies. Thank you. I'm also talking about the 18 countries in the world, of which 12 are of the African continent. These resources will support some of the most vulnerable people in some of the most forgotten crises around the world, including those at risk of famine in Africa. And ultimately, we need to act for peace in Africa. The United Nations is a proud partner for peace. From our joint missions to our peace building and peacekeeping efforts, and we share Africa's optimism springing from the African Union-led peace agreement here in Ethiopia, the ceasefire in Libya, the peace agreements in South Sudan and Central African Republic, and the forward momentum in Somalia. But our work is becoming more complex every day. Terrorism, violence, insecurity, and conflicts are rising across the continent, jeopardizing human lives and human rights. And in some countries, hard-won democratic gains are disappearing. Today, I outline a proposed new agenda for peace. Our plan to put prevention at the heart of our work to stop conflicts in their tracks. I strongly support the creation of a new generation of robust peacekeeping enforcement missions and counter-terrorist operations, led by the African Union with a Security Council mandate under Chapter 7 and guaranteed predictable funding, including through assessed contributions. Throughout the United Nations and the African Union, we remain steadfast partners and key initiatives, like the Independent High-Level Panel on Security and Development in the Sahel, established under the leadership of the former President of the Republic of Niger, Muhammadu Issoufou. And we will continue working together to advance democratic, accountable, and responsive governance structures across the continent. In all these efforts, Africa can count on our offices here in Africa and around the world. I look forward to continued partnership as we make the 21st century a true African progress, peace and prosperity for the 1.4 billion people who call it home. Thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. The Chairperson African Union Summit, the Secretary General of the United Nations Security Council, and your designated excellencies. Have a great day. We stand united today to discuss critical issues that affect our African nation in conjunction with the Europeans. By facto, Europeans and Africans need to understand that each of us need to get to a level where we understand each other better. That's why the dialogue like one today is very important in terms of common understanding of governance. The attitude of adult supervision has to be left in the past. Examples of right or wrong conduct can be found everywhere. We must avoid the temptation to reduce Africa to the lowest common denomination with blanket and generalization. For Africa, Europe is a partner of choice for many reasons. I believe that this year's summit is a right time to demonstrate the readiness for change and progress on both sides. This is a place where different voices, either side, can be heard, factored in into the one thinking for the future of our nations. This includes important perspectives that are rarely considered, which I will get to the moment. I firmly believe that this year is a greater turning point than before. In Africa, we are engaging with Europe with a view towards taking the relationship to a higher level and making sure it is adopted to the times we live in today. Africa has assets, capabilities to offer to the partnership, both human and material. Let's not ask what, and Africa will be made the center of rich economical growth and cultural diversity. The guiding question should be, what can Europe and Africa do together for mutual benefit, which neither can accomplish alone. We aim to change the terms of engagement on trade and investment. For Africa, the Continental Free Trade Area is now entering the implementation phase. This will open up new opportunities for more attractive cooperation, and with partners who have invested in Africa's prosperity, it is therefore important to ensure that the space probably and full implementation of the CFTA is respected. We wish to negotiate the future trading rules on the continent on continental to continental basis, not in fragmented or haphazard manners. We look forward to the new Africa-Europe Foundation and this distinguished group of personalities playing an important role in the process, including business leaders who are involved. I remain the President of Nigeria, Isaac Silvestro with honor. Thank you.
The Chairperson, African Union, Secretary General, United Nations, Secretary Council, Your Excellencies, comrades from Europe, Asia, and my fellow Africans, a very good morning. I am privileged to speak to you all. I thank the living God for bringing us all from the different aspects of our different worlds, but same universe, for this important dialogue like one today. This because understanding the different aspects, ideas, innovations, and inventions we develop will be looked at with utmost respect and admiration. African Union, as it stands, is a noble organization with a noble cause for African countries to develop the education sector, economic growth, and the fight to improve human rights. Education is one of the key elements of today's meeting. The system as it stands has proven to be a key factor in shaping the minds and empowering children and youth of Africa with knowledge alike. It is a system of learning that has nourished and projected a better future and life for Africans. Organizations such as United Nations Children's Fund and United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which is immensely contributing to the rate at which the education sector is developing to shape Africa's destiny. Africa's education has improved by 30% from the last of the existence of the African Union, though faced with various challenges such as early marriages, natural disasters, which greatly harms the social being. We must work hand in hand with delegates from Europe, Asia alike, and increase the literacy among Africans and about by 70%. We are privileged to have the investors from Europe, Asia, joining African Union to see that a better Africa is brought forth. Thank you so much for attending.
Chairperson, African Union Summit, Secretary General, UN, delegates from Europe and Asia, and my fellow African presidents, I greet you. Before you is Ainomgisha Martha, an ambassador from South Africa. South Africa has been actively involved in promoting peace, promoting human rights and economic development in Africa. As a key player in the continental organizations, South Africa has contributed to the various initiatives aimed at achieving these goals. Peace promotion. South Africa has played a significant role in peace-promoting missions in Africa, particularly through its involvement in the African Union and the United Nations. For instance, South Africa has participated in missions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and Sudan. Human protection. South Africa has been a strong advocate for human rights in Africa and has ratified several international and regional human rights investments. The country has also supported the establishment of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, which aim to promote and protect human rights on the continent. Economic development. South Africa has been a key driver of economic integration in Africa, particularly through its involvement in the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the African Continental Free Trade Area. The country has also invested in various infrastructure development projects across the continent and aimed at promotion, economic growth, and development. South Africa's annual budget distribution is quite comprehensive, covering various sectors to promote economic growth, social development, and national stability. Economic development. 221.1 billion rands was allocated in 2022, focusing on economic regulation and infrastructure, industrialization and exports, job creation, agriculture, and rural development. Peace and security. 220.7 rand was allocated in 2022, covering police services, defense and state security, law courts and prisons, and home affairs. General public services. 69.2 billion rands was allocated in 2022, including public administration and social affairs, executive and legislative organs, and external affairs. Learning and culture. 441.5 billion rands was allocated in 2022, emphasizing basic education, university transfers, national student financial aid, skills development, and education administration. Health. 259 billion rands was allocated in 2022, focusing on district health services, central hospital services, provincial hospital services, and other health services. Community development. 236.3 billion rands was allocated in 2022, covering municipal equitable share, human settlements, water and electrification, public transport and other human settlements and municipal infrastructure. Social development, 364.4 billion rands was allocated in 2022, including social security funds, old age grants, child support grants, social and other grants.
Chairperson, General Secretary, President, the President present, ambassadors and investors. Assalamu alaikum. I call for a renewed support to be given to the African Union relationships with the United Nations, stating that in the context of emerging multipolarity, the African Union provides an effective example of multilateralism in action, which proves that new forms of collaboration are more dynamic and impactful on the ground. African challenges, origins, and effects extend beyond its borders. Put simply, we are in this together. I go on to call for further reflection on what a successful collaboration between African Union and the United Nations could look like, commending as exemplary the impact of sustained engagement of both organizations, indirectly bringing about change on the ground, including the trilateral mechanism in Sudan, as well as through facilitating the transition from African Union military observation mission in Somalia to African Union transition mission in Somalia. As I wonder, I call on the Council to strive for achievement on security, predictable, sustainable, and flexible resources for Security Council authorized African Union-led operations, and emphasized that the need of both organizations to demonstrate unity and purpose on collaborating the growing threat in terrorism and climate change. Thank you.
The chairperson of the African Union Summit, the African Union Security Council presidents around, the invited guests, ambassadors, prime ministers, and the House at large. I welcome everyone here today, those from far and those from near, to the 37th African Union Summit Conference held in Addis Ababa. Therefore, for this 37th summit, the theme is demonstrating African Union's commitment to promote education, human rights, and economic development across the continent. Fellow Africans, today we stand united in our quest for a healthier, more peaceful, and prosperous continent. We recognize that health and the well-being of our people are the foundations upon which our development and progress are built. As we strive for peace and stability, we must also address the health disparities that plague our communities. We must invest in our healthcare systems, ensure access to quality medical care, and prioritize the prevention and treatment of diseases that disproportionately affect our people. The key areas of focus, number 1, healthcare infrastructures. We must build and upgrade our healthcare facilities, equip them with modern technology, and train our healthcare professionals to provide world-class care. Key area of focus number 2, disease prevention and control. We must intensify our efforts to prevent and control diseases such as malaria, HIV, AIDS, and tuberculosis, which have ravaged our communities for far too long. Key area of focus number 3, maternal and child health care. We must ensure that our mothers and children have access to quality health care and reduce the alarming rates of maternal and child mortality. As we work towards peace building, we must also recognize the intricate link between health and peace. Healthy communities are more resilient, more productive, and better equipped to resolve conflicts peacefully. Peace-building initiatives, conflict resolution mechanisms. We must establish effective conflict resolution mechanisms that prioritize dialogue, mediation, and reconciliation. Youth empowerment. We must empower our youth to become agents of peace and development and provide them with opportunities for education, employment, and entrepreneurship. Regional cooperation. We must strengthen our regional cooperation and collaboration to address common security threats and promote peace and stability. Let us work together to build an Africa where every individual has access to quality health care and where peace and stability reign supreme. We owe it to ourselves, our children, and our future generations. Lastly, my fellow Africans, this is not about you or me. It's about the legacy that we leave behind for the young that are to come after us. Thank you all.
To all the African presidents present, the investors that we have with us, the honored guests that are available to be with us today, you are most welcome. Majorly, we have three fundamental things that are affecting Africa. We have economic development, human rights, and education. These are more of the foundation of Africa, more of the basic factors that are helping Africa in prosperity and so on. When we look at economic development, because it now catalyzes everything that is running within Africa to make it a better place for all of us. This is one of the problems we are having, and how is it being hindered within Africa? We often have time that we have taxpayers failing to pay their money, that we have weak implementation within our countries. Then we also have human rights. We agree to the fact that human rights are there within our countries, but there's something lacking about the human rights that are not being actually generalized like within the world outside Africa. If Africa can actually do something of this kind, we can have the best world for each and everyone within Africa. Looking furthermore at education, yes, we have education, but is it the best education system? How is this education system providing to us the best life skills? So at the end of the day, as the African presidents that are here present, we're here to look at solutions of how we can solve these three problems that we're having within Africa: education, human rights, and economic development. What I expect from each and everyone who is here is to give me the best idea they think that can help us uplift education, human rights, and economic development. Education, it's more of the basic foundation that is actually uplifting Africa in the long run. We are all taking our children to school, but okay, at the end of the day, do they have jobs? Like, are we giving them the best skills that they should be attaining? Looking at how we can solve this, it can help us in a number of ways. Be it education, be it human rights, be it economic development. Because human rights, we understand we should be respecting the rights of other people. We should be respecting other people within society to have an effective place. And lastly, I'd like to thank everyone who has made it today, because it's not in our capacity and our capability, but just because of God's grace that we are here. Thank you so much.
The chairperson, head of state, investors, fellow delegates, secretaries, officials, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're all doing fine. It is with great joy that I return to Africa for the 21st time, once again, as President of Brazil, to address the leaders of the African Union. I come to reaffirm the partnership and bond between our country, our people, and our continent. The African struggle has a lot in common with the challenges faced by Brazil. To begin with, we must create a new global governance that is capable of facing the challenges of our time. Minimal state theories are no longer applicable. Planning agriculture and industrial development has once again become part of public policies in all sectors. Energy and digital require government leverage and guidance. Attempts to restore a global system based on ideological blocks are not applicable in the near world. Multi-party is an inexcusable as the world's most important arena for the orientation of emerging countries is an undeniable advance.
Without the participation of developing countries, it will not be able to open any new cycle of global expansion, combining growth, environmental preservation, and reduced inequality, and with increased freedoms. The Global South is becoming an unavoidable part of the solution to the main crisis of the afflict this planet. This crisis arises from a model that concentrates with wealth and which mainly affects the poorest. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa with its 1,500,000,000 inhabitants and its immense and rich territory has enormous possibilities for the future. Brazil wants to grow alongside Africa, but never dictating any paths. The Brazilian people are recovering their political and economic sovereignty. We are adopting an ecological transformation project, which will allow us to take a historical leap forward. We are reviving our democracy and making it increasingly participatory. Through Bolsa Familia and other successful public policies, we will once again leave the hunger map and lift millions of Brazilians out of poverty. I want to close by saying that there is no global south without Africa. Resuming Brazil's rapprochement with Africa means recovering historical ties and contributing to the construction of a new Africa. More than just and supporting world order, above all, it allows us to join forces in overcoming the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you very much.
The Secretary General, African Union, Chairperson, fellow ambassadors, delegates from Europe, Asia, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to this African Union Summit, and I'm here to talk about how peace, security, and development can be reinforced in Africa. Before you is the Ambassador of Egypt. A constructive relationship between the African Union and the United Nations would be in the best interest of peace, security, and development in Africa. What is required is a translation of obligations and commitments into reality. To that end, African peace operations must have to assess contributions, and peace-building activities must have their required funding. I call upon the Assembly to approve the Secretary General's proposal for $100 million annually in assessed contributions for the Peace-Building Fund. As underdevelopment remains a main cause of conflict, United Nations conferences on sustainable development must account for Africa's special situation. Egypt trusts that the upcoming conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in November will agree on urgent measures through concessional financing to promote Africa's ability to adapt and develop resilience. The need for the Council to work jointly with the African Union in a manner which leverages a comparative advantages and does not result in the Council's relinquished its commitments. There must be a real form of Bretton Woods institutions and the Council in accordance with the Conscious and Side Declaration. In conclusion, I call upon the African ambassadors, presidents, and fellow leaders to work hand in hand with the African Union and the United Nations for peace, security, and development to be reinforced in Africa. Thank you.
Union Summit, fellow presidents of various African states, prime ministers, ambassadors, and investors, and all other persons present here, I welcome you. According to this year's theme in relation to Eritrea, brings about a path to prosperity, a journey of all African countries to a brighter future, sending a loud cry to you all to listen attentively and solve the problems facing all of us here. As the head of Eritrea, we have faced quite a number of challenges that need to be addressed, and these fall under political, socio-economic, and mainly in the education sector. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the profound hardships my people are facing, I understand that many of you have endured significant struggles, whether due to a number of factors. We, the leaders of Eritrea, are sorry for the border conflict between us and Ethiopia, and we advocate for a peaceful resolution with our neighbors. As we do this, we shall improve the economic development through enhancing trade relationships and can also diversify the economy. Not forgetting, it shall improve security, reducing the risk of conflict and create more secure environment for Eritrea. As African countries, we need to see the trends on the economy and know the potential for economic growth from sectors such as mining, agriculture, and tourism. We need to increase investment and trade partnerships and also infrastructure development and improved governance. It is important to prioritize education, more so of the girl, to ensure empowerment, equality, and education reforms. We need to support each other so as to create a path to prosperity of the same initiatives and goals. We also endeavor to engage in all activities chartered by the African Union Committee to enable continuous engagement. And as I conclude, I hope for a strong and brighter future for all African countries. And as we stand at this crossroads of history, let us choose the path of unity, progress, and prosperity. Let us commit to implementing the policies outlined today, to invest in our people, and to build a brighter future for Africa.
Secretary General UN, my fellow President, good afternoon. Standing before you is the Prime Minister, India. No one can understand Africa better than our African brothers and sisters themselves. And history has shown that offering external solutions to African problems without African involvement has not served the interests of the African people. A supported and enhanced cooperation between the United Nations and the African Union, which could be of mutually benefit in a meaningful way. These organizations, along with sub-regional groups, should complement each other while keeping our active core mandates intact. The Council needs to work with the African Union's Peace and Security Council to strengthen financing mechanisms for African Union-led peace support operations authorized by the Council. Major donors, particularly developed countries, and the international financial institutions like World Bank, IMF, should ramp up their overseas development assistance commitments. They should also eliminate barriers to concessional financing to the economies of Africa, so that those economies can develop. This Council needs to move way beyond more limp service to Africans' concerns. Africa's continued lack of representation in the permanent category of Council membership is an historical injustice that needs to be corrected sooner rather than later. Namaste.
Chairperson AU, General Secretary United Nations, ambassadors, delegates from Europe, Asia, and African presidents, a good afternoon. It's an honor to stand before you today as the ambassador. It's an honor to stand before you today as the ambassador of Ghana. I am committed to serving my country, and I have all the dedication, the serving of the nation, and the integrity for a vision and a brighter future. Together we will work towards the economic prosperity, social justice, and sustainable environment for all. While the African Union should take a leadership role, the basis of its normative frameworks for peace, security, governance, United Nations responsibility and support is crucial. and it should not be curtailed. Chapter 7 of the Charter and the need to deepen cooperation between the Council and the African Union Peace, the Security Council, across the peace curtain for conflict prevention and peacekeeping. Peace building is sustaining peace. Consultations from United Nations and the African Union should be deepened and proactively focus on reinforcing the capacity for homegrown solutions and deal with the continent's complex security challenges, and the consultation should agreements for 2021 to 2025. The work plan for the enhancement for the African Standby Force due to the submission of the African Union Specialized Technical Committee on Defense, Safety and Security with increase in trade attacks in many parts of the continent and business as usual response invisible. The United Nations must be a partner as the United Nations proceeds for its implementation of Malaba Delegation Associated Culture. The two bodies should continue to enhance the rich experience built on the years and prevent diplomacy. Prevention is always better than curing, and early support for regional preventive measures would help to maintain international peace and security and realize the Silence for Guns initiative. Together we'll have the power and shape our nations for a future. Let us move forward with determination and unity, knowing that our best days are ahead of us. Thank you. May we continue to work together for a brighter future.
Various heads of state, prime ministers, ambassadors, and fellow Africans, I greet you all today. We various heads of state and representatives of nations have come together again as Africans, showing the unity and togetherness the African Union represents. Over the course of its existence, the African Union has made promoting education in different parts of Africa, prioritizing human rights, and strengthening economic development one of its major priorities in Africa today. I, as a proud African, and the President of Zimbabwe have come to the conclusion that we need to remind ourselves to work for the betterment of our countries. One of the first priorities is education, as the backbone for the future of our countries. We in our various countries have come to a realization that education is a vital resource that we need for our country's future to be bright. Educating the younger generation will help our countries, since through that we can groom future leaders and doctors, engineers who will make our countries prosperous and bring a brighter future. Then, on my second priority, human rights, its protection of justice and dignity. Thanks to the efforts of the African Union, human rights are being enforced and protected across Africa. Through the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, our efforts to protect the sanctity and dignity of humans has been fruitful and thankfully not in vain. Despite many ups and downs we may face, we will continue to enforce and strengthen our endeavors to continue to protect human rights. Now, my final priority, economic development as the essence of change and growth. As a president and an African, I've endeavored to make the economic development of my country a must and a mandate in order for the prosperity of my people. Through the participation in international trade and also in various trade unions in Africa and across the world, my country's development has improved significantly, leading to the improvement of various sectors within the economy. Through these various endeavors, I hope to aim for a brighter future for the country. I would therefore like to conclude that we as Africans should learn and pick something from the past, because we learn that history, unfortunately, can be repeated, and we cannot afford to succumb to the mistakes of our ancestors. So, let's continue to stand together as one Africa for the betterment of our country's future. Thank you very much.
A very good afternoon to you all. I'm so delighted to meet you as other presidents of African countries in this momentous gathering. Human rights. The protection of human rights is the foundation of sustainable peace. The national human rights should play a very big role in promoting human rights, regardless of their background. All persons are equal in dignity and human rights and should not be discriminated against their color, tribe, social and economic standings. A person's rights can never be taken away. We are supposed to be free and independent, not that Mr. Antonio. We are supposed to be free. There are 54 countries. We come to the United Nations every year, September. We are there. We pay lots of money to go there. The General Assembly makes speeches. We go back home year in, year out. But the bosses in the Security Council say, we shall never have the powers you have, permanent members. And we have asked and asked and asked and asked. Reform the Security Council. I want to tell you, Mr. Antonio, you are a good man. You are a good man. But of course, we can make you a fighter. That's not what your mission was. We will fight a fight for our own identity, for our own integrity and personality as Africans. We are Africans. Thank you all.
Distinguished guests, fellow Ugandans, it's an honor to stand before you today to reflect on the significant role the African Union has played in promoting education, economic development, and social progress within Uganda. The African Union's initiatives, particularly through the Agenda 2063 and the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, CSA, has been instrumental in shaping education policies across the continent within Uganda. The African Union's focuses on inclusive education has helped Uganda increase access to education, particularly through the Universal Primary Education, UPE, Universal Secondary Education, USE programs. The African Union's emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM has encouraged Uganda to strengthen its education curriculum, focusing on the skills development for the 21st century. Through the African Union programs like Pan-African University, Ugandan students have gained opportunities for higher learning in specialized specialized fields across Africa. However, challenges remain. Schools in rural areas often lack proper infrastructure, hindering quality learning. Despite progress, there is still shortage of well-trained teachers to meet the demand. The government should continue prioritizing funding for rural education infrastructure, including digital tools for learning. Strengthening teacher training programs in collaboration with the African Union initiative to ensure a sufficient and skilled workforce. The African Union has actively promoted economic growth in Uganda through Uganda's participation in the AFCFTA has opened new markets for our goods and services, fastening regional trade and reducing barriers. The African Union programs have promoted agriculture transformation, benefiting Uganda's economy, which relies heavily on this sector. The African Union focuses on empowering youth and women has seen Uganda's increased participation in entrepreneurship and small business development. Despite these strides, challenges still exist. Uganda continues to grapple with high youth unemployment despite the economic growth. Strengthening regional infrastructures in partnership with the African Union and international partners to ensure smoother trade routes and economic collaboration. The African Union's commitment to peace, security, social cohesion has also contributed significantly to the Ugandan social development. This is seen in the African Union's peacekeeping regional stability and allowing Uganda to focus on development. The African Union has supported initiatives to combat diseases, including the fight against HIV, stroke, AIDS, and the other communicable diseases. However, some social challenges still persist. Poverty level remains high, especially in rural areas. Women and girls in Uganda still face a significant barrier in education and employment. And the proposed solution goes as scaling up social protection programs to provide a safety net for the most vulnerable populations. Continued focuses on gender equality, ensuring women have equal access to education, economic opportunities, and leadership positions. The African Union has played a pivotal, vital role in shaping Uganda's progress in education, economic development, and social cohesion. While there are challenges ahead, through continued collaboration and innovative solutions, we can ensure that Uganda and Africa as a whole continue to the path to prosperity for God and my country. Thank you.
United Nations Secretary Council, Your Excellencies and Your First Ladies, dear friends from Europe, Asia, and fellow Africans, a good afternoon. Today I come to talk about human rights in Africa as the President of Kenya, William Ruto. Human rights in Africa today is on a thin thread of contradiction with Western influence. The way different African states perceive human rights prejudice in contrast in ideologies. Human rights today is aimed at deliberation and intimidation within the public eye in most African states. Driven by the passion for a transition in the old African setting, the Western world now aims at tarnishing the culture of Africanity and the creed of togetherness in humanity through uncoerced claims of amending human rights the Western way. This act of hideousness poses great risks to a possible continental sabotage. Political unrests today have relentlessly brought social differences in contrast to human rights. Heads of state across the continent accord human rights in line with constitutional attributes by setting up independent bodies to foresee human rights activism. The campaign to increase human rights awareness is boldly possible. In the recent years, human rights in Africa has gone through a terrible drag beneath the ocean beds. Cases of human rights violation has been soaring across the continent from sub-Saharan Africa as far as the north and to the horn of Africa. Unlawful arrests, human saccharism of death sentences, denial of public expression and public operation all add up to the deteriorating human rights cases in recent times. To see the need for human rights activism, the continent heads of states should acknowledge the fact that an act of violation against human rights poses serious threats to African well-being. As I end, the apathy caused by the acts aimed at violating human rights is immense. The heads of state should therefore advocate for the betterment of human rights for Africa as our motherland. Thank you.
the chairperson of this Botasha Summit, gallant African leaders, fellow ambassadors, and all the guests of today's gathering, greetings to you all. I am Liana Nakaye, the ambassador of Equatorial Guinea to the African Union. Before I go any further with my speech, I request that we put a hand clap to the Almighty God who has made it possible for Africa to stand in unison. Equatorial Guinea, being one of the developing countries in West Africa, known for her oil wealth and abundant resources, had been characterized by only and only horrifics in the early 20th century. My darling country was defined by political instability, where Equatorial Guinea was described by poor democratic negotiations between the government and the opposition. My country was also defined by poor economy, where it was spoken about for its poor trade systems. In addition, my country was spoken about poor education structure, characterized for overcrowded institutions. But great gratitude goes to the mighty African Union. The poor education in my country in the recent years has been wiped away. The African Union ensured the establishment of the CESA, Continental Education System for Africa, which has enabled the state and other continental leaders to discuss on the education, improvising ideas. The flexibility of the program has stretched not only in Equatorial Guinea, but also in countries like Senegal, Niger, Burkina Faso, and many others. In the field of political instability, the African nation has scrapped off conflict between the current president, Chero Obiang, and the opposition by promoting dialogue and resolution programs which have promoted peaceful interactions and calm negotiations. This same mitigation has been used by the African Union not only in my country, but also in countries like South Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Burkina Faso. In the world of economics, the Union has also introduced initiatives and frameworks like the Agenda 2023. This agenda has created a prosperous trading module to the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, that has not only promoted trade, but also promoted employment opportunities in my country. Like any vector, African Union has succumbed to problems, and the key problem is corruption among the African states. This is illustrated with mainly misappropriation of funds, and I would like to advise the African leaders to put follow-up programs to monitor anti-corruption bodies so as to follow up the programs of anti-corruption bodies at large. Working together with these leaders, African Union should refrain an overall body to oversee and watch the anti-corruption bodies all over Africa. Let's not forget that under every greatness, there is a weakness. The African Union itself has not yet made it to Africa's expectations, and therefore should conclusively work with not only the United Nations, but also other organizations like the European Union, Commonwealth, and very many other bodies, so as to get ideologies on development and well-being of Africa. For Africa, my continent. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed leaders and fellow Africans, I greet you in the name of the Almighty God, and I dearly welcome you to the 2024 African Summit. On such a day, we gather, discuss on how to develop our motherland. It's a great honor to stand before you to present this speech. And I'm here to discuss about how the United Nations are violating the rights of Africans. Are you aware that the United Nations has participated in the violation of the rights of Africans. To set the ball rolling, while the United Nations promote and protect human rights globally, there have been instances where UN actions and inactions have been criticized for violating human rights in Africa today. And this is mostly with the peacekeeping missions. First of all, we have sexual exploitation and abuse, whereby the UN peacekeepers have been accused of sexual exploitation and abuse in Africa, particularly in countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, and South Sudan. We also have child labor, whereby the UN peacekeepers have been linked to child labor and forced recruitment in the DRC, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have forced deportations, whereby the United Nations has been accused of complicity in forced deportations of refugees and migrants from countries like Libya to Nigeria, Algeria to Niger. We move on to talk about the economic sanctions. For instance, the Sudan sanctions, 1997 to 2017. The United Nations imposed economic sanctions on Sudan that led to human suffering, including food insecurity and economic hardship. We also have the Eritrea sanctions, 2009 to 2019, whereby the United Nations sanctions on Eritrea affected the country's economy and human rights. In conclusion, the United Nations has really increased the rate of the human rights abuse in Africa, which calls in for our reaction to end this act of unfairness. Thank you.
Chairperson Union Summit, General Secretary, African Presidents and fellow invited guests. Good afternoon. World Food Programme submission in the African Union Summit. The World Food Programme submission to the African Union Summit focuses on addressing food insecurity. Key areas of focus: food assistance, providing emergency food to aid and sick people, sustainable development, supporting African countries in achieving the United Nations, climate action, implementing climate agricultural practices and supporting climate change, economic empowerment, food systems, promoting entrepreneurship, World Food Programme strategy aims to strengthen partnership with African governments, regional organizations, and local communities. Agricultural development, food system, assistance with people, policy and advocacy. By addressing these critical areas, we seek to contribute food security and prosperous Africa. Thank you all.
Invited guests, with your privileges, my fellow African presidents, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. It is both an honor and a profound responsibility to address you today on the matter that holds key to our continent's future. That's education. I, as the president of Djibouti, I'm here to specifically talk about education. I believe that if we are to embrace education as Africans, together we can create a very greater and very better continent in the near future. Education is not merely a pathway to knowledge, it is a cornerstone to progress, a bridge to opportunity, and the foundation upon which we can build a prosperous and united Africa fit for the 21st century. In a world that is rapidly changing, we must recognize that the education systems of the past cannot adequately prepare our youth for the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. The 21st century demands a new vision, one that is inclusive, innovative, and adaptable. First and foremost, we must prioritize inclusivity in education. Every child in Africa, regardless of their gender, socio-economic background, or geographical location, deserves quality education or deserves access to quality education. We must dismantle the barriers that prevent marginalized communities from participating in fully in educational system. This requires not merely investment in infrastructure, but also a commitment to policies that promote equity and diversity in our schools. Secondly, we need to embrace innovation. The technological revolution in reshaping the landscape of education. We must enhance the power of digital tools and online learning platforms to ensure that our children are not just consumers of technology, but creators and innovators. By integrating technology into our curricula, we can equip our students with the skills necessary for the jobs of the future, fostering a spirit of entrepreneurship and critical thinking. Not only that, but also enforcing a spirit to get more of education. Moreover, we must strengthen our partnership. Education is not solely the responsibility of governments as we think. It requires collaboration between the private and the public sectors, civil societies, and international organizations. By fostering these partnerships, we can share resources, expertise, and be best at practices that will enhance the quality of education across the continent. Furthermore, we must emphasize the importance of lifelong learning. The rapid pace of the change in our world necessitates that education does not stop at the classroom door. Just as the saying says, we must emphasize that learning never ends. We need to cultivate a culture where learning is a continuous journey, one that equips individuals with the skills to adapt to evolving circumstances and to thrive in an unpredictable future. Lastly, let us not forget the power of education towards promoting peace and security and unity in our continent. This is even one of the major aims of why we come for such meetings of African Union. In a continent that has faced its share of challenges, education can be a unifying force. By teaching our children about tolerance, respect, and the richness of our diverse cultures, we can foster a sense of belonging and share purpose that transcends borders. This is to say, our children will have respect for each other. As we gather here today, let us recommit ourselves to the vital mission. The future of Africa rests in the hands of our youth, and it is our duty to ensure that they are equipped to face it with confidence and competence. Together, let us create an educational framework that not only prepares our students for the demands of the 21st century, but also empowers them to become leaders and innovators of tomorrow who are going to replace us. In closing, I invite each one of you to join me in this endeavor. Let us collaborate, innovate, and invest in education so that together we can build a brighter future for Africa, a future where every child has the opportunity to thrive and contribute to our shared prosperity. I remain Phyllis Gamkama. Thank you for listening. Together we stand and divided we fall.
Organization representatives, ladies and gentlemen, a good afternoon to you all. It is really grateful for us as African presidents to meet and discuss the challenging issues and the possible solutions to the problems Africa is facing in general.
Today, we stand at the threshold of a new era of peace, unity, and development. We gather to reaffirm our commitment to the advancement of human rights and peace building on our beloved continent. African unity and cooperation. We recognize that our diversity is our strength and our country is our power. The African Continental Free Trade is a shining example of our resolve to build a prosperous and integrated continent. We must continue to break down barriers, foster cooperation, and create opportunities for all Africans to thrive. Human rights and peace building. The protection of human rights is the foundation of sustainable peace. National human rights institutions have a critical role to play in conflict prevention, resolution, and management. We must uphold the fundamental human rights of all Africans, regardless of their background, creed, or orientation. Traditional African values. We draw inspiration from our indigenous values of collective personhood, where I am because we are. Our socialization and community-based approach to conflict resolution can serve as a model for the world. International partnerships. We appreciate the support of international partners such as China in our efforts to build capacity for peace and security. We also recognize the importance of the United Nations dual resolutions on sustaining peace, which emphasizes the need for a common vision of society. Let us work together to build an Africa where every individual can live in peace, dignity, and prosperity. Let us harness our collective strength, creativity, and resilience to overcome our challenges. Together, we can achieve greatness. Together, we will build an African that is the envy of the world. Thank you.
The Chairman AU Summit, the General Secretary, presidents from different countries, ambassadors, prime ministers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all. As the theme of this year's states, demonstrate the African Union commitment to promoting education, human rights, and economic development across the continent, I'll break down my speech into 3 parts as our theme states. I would love to recommend the African Union and thank it for the great job done in keeping peace in its member states. We have probably seen and heard of the endless work that has been done to eliminate the enemy. We thank you. I also appreciate it for doing the endless endeavors in health sector to ensure that people receive the health services they need. Unfortunately, to my dismay, we are having problems in the education sector, and yet this is where the people who are to succeed us are supposed to come from. The sector of education in Africa, as collected by UNICEF, show that if it is 100%, 78% will begin, and by the time they join higher institutions, only 45% will be able to make it. But ask yourselves the question, what's the problem? Some of the problems facing this sector are corruption in the government. There is a lot of money that is always passed through the legislative councils in the different countries, but when this money is released, it will never reach to those it's supposed to work upon. Where does the money go? Free equipment or no? After the money has been embezzled, no services can continue, hence schools getting study materials that are not enough for the students. When the money is not enough, the teachers will not teach these students. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to fight this, but how are we going to do it? 1, governments should provide enough study materials in the schools so that children can get enough knowledge that will enable them to build more to their countries. Government should put people who are qualified in the different ministries so as they perform their duties right, and they must be trustworthy so that children are able to get the knowledge they need. The other thing I want to talk about is the violation of human rights. We all know that human rights, these are entitlements that people must have. But the people who violate them, they have weird ideologies, political differences, and religious differences. Fellow delegates, we have to make sure that our people get the rights they deserve. The bodies which are responsible for these rights are the police, the army, among others. And how do they violate people's rights? Through the action of torture. Some years ago, we all witnessed as a black man from America, George Floyd, was killed for no reason. How else do they do it? Through political execution. All of us here, we have faced this. We are all political leaders. So, comrades, at least let us try to make sure that our people get the human rights they need by stopping discrimination among the people. Let us be one and not divide ourselves. I also want to talk about the economic development of Africa. I appreciate the fact that in America there are very many economic organizations like IGAD, ECOWAS, EAC, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, with all this, we shall be able to make Africa a better continent. Thank you.
The war between Ukraine and Russia has significant implications for African economic development. With Africa relying heavily on food imports from both countries, the conflict has led to soaring wheat, sunflower, oil crude prices, affecting food security and economic growth. Food security concerns. The conflict has disrupted the supply chain of essential commodities, particularly wheat and sunflower, which are crucial for many African countries. North Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sudan, and South Africa are among the most affected regions. Accounting for 80% of wheat imports, this disruption has resulted in price shocks, with staple food prices surging by an average of 23.9% in 2022 to 2023. Economic impact. The war has also led to a global energy crisis, with prices soaring to a 3-decade high. African countries still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic are struggling to cope up with the increased energy costs. The conflict has further exacerbated debt distress, with 7 African countries already in debt crisis and 14 more at high risk. Opportunities for growth. However, the crisis presents an opportunity for Africa to reduce its reliance on food imports and boost local production. The African Continental Free Trade Area can play a crucial role in promoting intra-African trade and growing Africa's agribusiness sectors. Our key areas for the action: increase of local food production. Africa must leverage its 60% global share of arable land to grow more food for domestic consumption and exports. Diversify energy resources. African countries should explore alternative energy sources such as renewable energy to reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels. Promote the intra-African trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area can help increase production and value addition in Africa's agribusiness sectors. By addressing these areas, Africa can mitigate economic impacts of the Ukraine-Russia war, conflict and foster sustainable growth and development. In conclusion, the Ukraine and Russia war in relation to African economic development has done more harm than good. Therefore, this war has contributed towards underdevelopment among East African countries, especially to importing countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, and among others. So let us unite as African countries to maximize our production so as to avoid facing challenges of economic development. Thank you for listening.
The Chairperson AU, the General Secretary, our dear invited guests, esteemed colleagues, together with all the ladies and gentlemen in this house, I greet you all. My name is Ndagano Christine, representing Algeria as the ambassador. Today, I stand before you to highlight the African Union's unwavering commitment to promoting education, human rights, and economic development, while also addressing the challenges we face and the solutions we must embrace. Education is a cornerstone of progress. The African Union recognizes that an educated populace is essential for fostering innovation and empowering individuals. However, challenges such as inadequate funds, lack of infrastructure, and disparities in access remain prevalent. To combat these issues, we must advocate for increased funds in education, forge partnerships with the private sector, and leverage technology to reach remote areas. Through these initiatives like the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, we remain to ensure that every child has an opportunity to thrive. Human rights are the most heart of our vision for Africa. The African Union actively campaigns the promotion such as political instability, gender inequality, and limited access to justice. To address these issues, we must strengthen our regional mechanism, promote civic education, and empower grassroots organizations by holding our member states accountable through the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. We can work together as a continent where dignity, freedom, and justice prevail. Economic development is vital for our continent's growth. The African Union's Agenda 2063 outlines our aspirations for inclusive growth, but we face hurdles such as high unemployment rate, economic disparities, and reliance on single communities. To overcome these challenges, we must promote regional integration, diversify our economies, and invest in sustainable industries. By fostering trade and enhancing infrastructure, we can lay the groundwork. By fostering trade and enhancing infrastructure, we can lay the groundwork for economic resilience and prosperity for all Africans. Therefore, I conclude by justifying that African Union's commitment to education, human rights, and development is not just a vision, it's our collective mission as Africans. By recognizing and addressing the challenges we face, we can create a prosperous and equitable Africa where every citizen can achieve their fullest potential. Thank you.
Fellow African leaders, distinguished guests, citizens of this great continent, Assalamu alaikum. I stand before you as an entrusted president of South Sudan. Today, I speak to you about a grave injustice that has plagued Africa for centuries. The exploitation of our resources, our riches have been plundered, our environment degraded, and our people impoverished. For so long, external powers have ravaged our land, extracting wealth without regard for our well-being. The scramble of Africa, once a physical partition, has transformed into an economic scramble. Africa is rich. 40% of Africa's wealth goes on the gold we reserve, and 60% of our untapped arable land, vast oil, gas, and mineral deposits. Yet we struggle to benefit from our blessings. Poverty afflicted millions and millions of people in this beautiful continent of ours. Infrastructure lags behind and debt burdens our nation's great continent. We must break this curse. The African Continental Freetown area is a virtuous connecting our markets and unleashing economic potential. We must safeguard our environment through protecting forests, rivers, and wildlife, invest in our renewable energy, and adopt sustainable practices. Africa's belong to us Africans, not non-Africans. We will no longer be spectators in the exploitation of heritage. We will enact and enforce robust regulations, hold corporations accountable, and empower local communities. The time for change is now. Let's unite to reclaim our riches, restore our dignity, and build a prosperous Africa for all. Thank you for listening. I remain Trina Fortunate, President, South Sudan.
Summit, esteemed African leaders, fellow ambassadors, the Olan fraternity, a good afternoon. Before you is Justin, an ambassador of Senegal at the United Nations. I'm here to address the problem concerning human rights and insecurity. The international tools to address conflicts in Africa are no longer adapted to reality, partly due to the changing nature of these conflicts, which involve myriad actors, multiplying means of inflicting violence, and an uptick in asymmetric security, such as terrorism and organized crime. While the African Union and African sub-regional organizations have demonstrated their determination and their ability to provide an immediate response to the crisis, their ability to act is constrained. I'm calling for predictable funding for African Union peacekeeping operations authorized by the Council in line with the Council resolution. I call on the Council to lend support to the proposal to set up a United Nations Specialized Support Office, funded through assessed United Nations contributions to provide the GSL Sahel Joint Force funding commensurate with the security challenges it faces. I echo other speakers' views to make room for African representation among the Council's permanent membership, called on appeal from the heart, which will serve the international community's interests. Thank you.
Your Excellencies and all other African leaders at this event, a very good day to you all. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today in order to reaffirm Benin's commitment to education, human rights, and economic development principles that resonate deeply with the vision of the African Union. While we celebrate our progress, we must also acknowledge the challenges we face. Access to quality education remains uneven, with many children, particularly in rural areas, still unable to attend school. Additionally, we continue to grapple with issues of human rights violations, including gender-based violence and discrimination. Economically, our nation faces the hurdles of unemployment, especially among our youth. In our country, we are facing many challenges that are affecting the education system, economic development, and the human rights. So, me as the president of this great of this great country, Benin, I have come up with solutions that will enable us fight the above challenges with the help of the African Union. Firstly, I'll talk about the education system in Benin. Many children in rural areas lack access to quality education. For example, children who lack transport means to schools since they are far and can't be there in time. In order to solve this, we are partnering with the African Union to implement targeted programs that enhance educational infrastructure and provide mobile learning solutions. This will ensure that every child, regardless of their location, can access quality education. Secondly, human rights violations persist, particularly against women and marginalized groups. For example, many women in our country are being raped. We can solve this by promoting awareness campaigns to educate our citizens about their rights. Working with the African Union, we will also enhance monitoring and reporting mechanisms to hold violations accountable. Lastly, I'll talk about the economic development. Youth unemployment remains a significant issue. We have decided to align our national strategies with the African Continental Free Trade Area to create more job opportunities. By investing in vocational training and entrepreneurship programs, we aim to empower our youth to become job creators than job seekers. In conclusion, as we work alongside the African Union and our international partners, let us remain committed to overcoming these challenges. Together, we can build a more equitable and prosperous Benin, where education is accessible to all, human rights are respected, and economic opportunities abound. Thank you.
It is both an honor and a privilege to stand before you today at this significant summit, where we gather as a united force to address the pressing issues facing our continent. As we work towards a prosperous and equitable Africa, I would like to focus our discussion on three pivotal pillars: the development of our education system, the promotion of human rights, and the enhancement of economic development. Education, the catalyst of transformation. Education is the cornerstone of progress. It empowers individuals, uplifts communities, and drives nations forward. In Burundi, we recognize that investing in education is not just an obligation, it is a basic necessity for our collective future. We have embarked then on a bold initiative to reform our education system, prioritizing access, quality, and inclusivity. Our aim is therefore to ensure that every child, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to learn and thrive. We are committed to training our educators, enhancing curricula, and investing in technology to equip our youth with the skills they need to equip or navigate an ever-evolving global landscape. Human rights, the foundation of dignity and peace. The promotion and protection of human rights are fundamental to building peaceful and prosperous societies. In Burundi, we understand that respecting the dignity of every individual is essential for fostering trust and cohesion within our communities. As we pursue development, let us remember that progress cannot come at the expense of our citizens' rights. We are committed to promoting gender equality, protecting the rights of marginalized groups, and ensuring that all voices are perceived in our democratic processes. Economic development, building sustainable futures. Therefore, we are focused on creating an enabling environment for investment and entrepreneurship, fostering innovation and harnessing our rich natural resources sustainably. I invite our partners across Africa to collaborate in trade, infrastructure, and technology initiatives. Together, we can create a robust and interconnected African economy that benefits all our nations. I would also urge member states to share best practices, resources, and knowledge, creating a network of support that elevates education across our continent. Together, we can empower the next generation of leaders, innovators, and change makers. Not forgetting to strengthen our regional frameworks for human rights protection by fostering culture of respect and inclusion to create societies where everyone can contribute to and benefit from our collective progress. Furthermore, we must prioritize youth employment and vocational training, ensuring that our young people are equipped with the skills they need for the jobs of tomorrow. Let us build a continent where no young person is left behind and where every individual can contribute to and share in our economic prosperity. A call to unity and action. As we move forward, I call upon each of you to join hands in this noble endeavor. Let us unite our efforts in the pursuit of quality education, the protection of human rights, and the promotion of sustainable economic development. Together, we can build an Africa that is not only resilient but also thriving, a continent where every citizen enjoys the fruits of progress, dignity, and opportunity. In closure, let's remember that our strength lies in our unity. Together, we can overcome challenges and unlock the full potential of our great continent, Africa. Let us work tirelessly for a brighter African future. Thank you.